Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, the Knesset passes a controversial new law challenging the right to gather or protest. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu unveils Hezbollah terror group secrets on the world stage at the UN, and an ancient Roman-era mikveh finds a new home in the Lower Galilee. Stay tuned to follow its journey. Our top news tonight, the walls are seemingly closing in on all sides. Israel's Knesset now passing a controversial law overnight to limit the right to protest amidst the apparently indefinite coronavirus lockdowns.
הצבעה בקריאה השלישית על הצעת החוק. חבר הכנסת אבוטבול, אני מבקש לנתק לו את המיקרופון. 46 בעד, 38 נגד, אין נמנעים. לפיכך אני קובע שהצעת חוק סמכויות מיוחדות להתמודדות עם נגיף הקורונה החדש הוראת שעה תיקון מספר 2 התשפ"א 2020 התקבלה בקריאה השלישית ונכנסה לספר החוקים.
Following an all-night debate, lawmakers Wednesday morning narrowly passed legislation banning Israelis from holding demonstrations more than 1 kilometer or 0.6 miles away from home, supposedly in efforts to stifle the spread of the coronavirus. And the new law now seriously threatening the summer-long and ongoing protests against the government's handling of coronavirus, as well as against alleged corruption by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But with Netanyahu now also saying that full public and private sector coronavirus lockdowns are set to continue for at least the next month, protesters have just been more galvanized by the move, many having already broken COVID regulations to travel to Jerusalem and protest this new legislation.
We are here protesting, fighting for democracy, and requesting the resignation of the Prime Minister, who proved he has failed in running this very, very complicated situation.
They're denying us of the right to protest because of political reasons, not for health reasons. And it's mind-blowing.
Likewise, Knesset opposition leader and Yesh Atid party chair Yair Lapid responded to the law, tweeting, "What's next? Forbidding the opposition leader from speaking at the plenum?" Still, backers of the law, which had previously been blocked by disagreements within the coalition, argue that a crackdown on gatherings had to be issued, especially given Israel's continuously ballooning coronavirus infection rate. Under the new law, the government may now curb protests, prayers, and religious ceremony gatherings for a week, with the possibility to extend for another 2 weeks should the need remain. Demonstrators will also be banned from traveling beyond 1 kilometer from home to protest, period. And as for the limit on gatherings, it'll be up to 10 indoors, 20 people outdoors, and 2,000 in Jerusalem's Paris Square, as long as people divide into distanced capsules of 20. And this being a huge reduction to the upwards of 10 to 20,000 people that have been arriving at the square until now. Joining us now for more on the new Special Coronavirus Emergency Authorities Bill, attorney and Israel advocate Ron Barros. Ron, thank you so much for being with us today.
Happy to be here.
All right, now, my first question to you is, what do you make of this new law? Is it constitutional? Might the High Court have something to say about this?
The High Court always wants to have a say in everything, but I think that the law is fairly moderate. I'm not a happy camper with this law. Obviously, in democracy, the right to protest is a very vital and important right, but we have to understand that we are in a very odd situation. We have a pandemic. It's not restricting protests per se. It's saying that you have limitations. You always have limitations on protest. You cannot protest, for instance, at 3 a.m. In a pedestrian area. You always have limitations on protest. But here's the thing. I'm trying to understand, I spent the last Rosh Hashanah completely by myself. And after the holiday was over, I opened the news and I saw that hundreds of people came and gathered next to the Prime Minister's home. And that's where they had their Rosh Hashanah meal. And I'm trying to understand why that is more important than my right to go and meet other people during the holidays. Or, right now I have a grandma that has her last days before she passes away, unfortunately. And I think it's also a very important right for me to go visit her. but I understand that I have a responsibility as a citizen to protect myself and others. And I think that in this crazy situation that we're facing right now, a pandemic, it makes sense to limit the protesters.
So you don't believe that there's any truth maybe to the hypothesis that this law was passed to hinder anti-government protests?
I think it's absurd, and I actually feel bad. I'll tell you something. There are two things that Israelis care about. One is to never be a friar, and I believe my audience, even those who don't speak Hebrew, understand what I'm saying.
A sucker.
And the second is, and the second is to not have a sense of solidarity. And when I'm saying that I had to spend Rosh Hashanah by myself, but people drove from all over Israel to have a gigantic feast, hundreds of people eating together next to the prime minister's house because that's their way of protesting, that's a lack of solidarity with other people, elderly people, people like myself, or not elderly, but was by myself for the holidays. I'm trying to understand how can that be only political. Now, again, the right to protest is extremely important in a democracy, but it always have limitation, not just in a pandemic area. And right now in a pandemic era, obviously, we're going to have more limitations. I don't really understand how that is so complicated. The law does not say that people are not allowed to protest. It says you're only allowed to protest within a certain distance from your home. I'm trying to understand.
And in groups of 20, yeah.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand. Someone is allowed to drive and protest, but they're not allowed to drive and visit their grandma. How would that make any more sense? I think it's a fair balance. Also, if you look into the details of the law, which I know most people are not gonna, but if you go into the details of the law, it has a very good checks and balances between the government and the legislative branch. The legislative branch can decide that it's going to either renew or stop it. We're talking about the limitation of time for this law. It's not like they're saying no more protests in Israel forever. So I think those who are worried so much about the democracy in Israel, first they need to look at the international measurements that see that our democracy is actually in a rise and not in a decline. And second of all, proportion is a very important word to remember here. Israel is a vibrant democracy. We're in a very harsh times. We're not the only democracy in the world that has limitations on protest. So I would take it with a...
Thank you so much, Ron Barros. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Now, protests or no protests, coronavirus numbers in Israel continue to reach dangerous new heights every day, with government leaders fearing the worst as the Sukkot holiday weekend comes in. Nittany Manson with the details.
Overtaking the U.S. one day, then skyrocketing farther the next. Israel now boasting a coronavirus infection rate nearly 3 times higher than any other nation on Earth. Over 50% of Israel's total coronavirus caseload having been recorded in just the past 30 days. That's 118,583 confirmed diagnoses since September 1st, bringing the new total in Israel to upwards of 239,800. Over 65,149 actively sick as of this morning, 810 in serious condition, thereby blowing past the hospital network's red line of 800, and the death toll rising to 1,547. But in spite of the worrying statistics and pleas from authorities, many continue to flout the rules. Reports on Tuesday alleging thousands of ultra-Orthodox citizens breaking capsule programs and distancing measures, and then returning home to their communities for the holidays without proper testing. Hundreds also launching protests Tuesday night over the detention of Haredi worshippers for violating lockdown rules. So ahead of the Sukkot holiday set to begin this Friday, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been speaking with leaders of the ultra-Orthodox community, again trying to get them to prevent and disperse holiday gatherings. Meanwhile, coronavirus czar Professor Roni Gamzu, fed up with his recommendations being overlooked, is reportedly expected to quit his post at the end of October. Israeli media alleging that Netanyahu has offered the post instead to former Director General of the Health Ministry, Moshe Bar Simantov.
So how will Israel's healthcare system stand up against the out-of-control infection rates and government indecision? Joining us to discuss is the head of internal medicine at Israel's Sheba Medical Center, Dr. Gadi Segal. Dr. Segal, thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome.
All right, so first of all, we hear that new coronavirus wards are opening up practically constantly and that we have now surpassed the 800 severe cases red line set by the hospitals. What does this mean for our healthcare system?
It means that our healthcare system is overloaded but it has been overloaded for a while now. It's, you know, the number is an arbitrary number. And the problem is not the number of hospitalized, it's also the number of severe, and it's the number of healthcare professionals that are debilitated and staying in isolation and at home. And you cannot quantify the tiredness of the staffs, and there are so many aspects that cannot be just summarized as a number. I don't say, and I don't think that our healthcare system is falling apart. This is not true, but indeed it is working very, very hard, and it is overloaded, certainly.
All right, well, a number of weeks ago, you actually made a now infamous post on Facebook saying that you were ashamed of Israeli society's behavior. Do you still feel that way with respect to the pandemic?
I am expressing my feelings with respect to the current situation, not in order to express my feelings. I do not wish to be a public character. I'm expressing my feelings in order to cause an action. When I announced that my intention was to move people towards friendship, towards using their masks, towards avoiding crowded places. Right now, this is not the issue. Right now, I think we are in the midst of a very harsh fight against COVID. And right now, I'm changing my expressions. Right now, I'm expressing the stamina of Israel's 111 internal medicine departments, which are working day and night, nurses and physicians, alongside with the ICU crews, to enable the admission of thousands of COVID-19 patients. And we strive to keep the mortality as low as we can.
Well, so do you believe that the coming closures, or rather the ongoing closures that we're going through right now, are going to help?
I can give you an analogy for the closure. When you ask me about the closure, whether it is going to help. We have already jumped out of the airplane. And right now you are asking me, do you think that a parachute can help? Yes. The answer is yes. When we still sat in the plane, I strived that Israelis will use masks, that will obey the physical distancing. But right now, when the pandemic is so hard, when it is so widespread, we don't have any choice. Right now, we just fell out of the airplane, and the closure is our only parachute. And the more this parachute will be wider, the more this parachute will be stronger, then the landing will be easier.
All right, Dr. Gadi Segal, thank you so much for joining us, and happy holidays this weekend.
Thank you very much.
Moving on, it's Israel's turn to address the United Nations this week, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did not disappoint, revealing to the assembly in a pre-recorded video an alleged Hezbollah missiles factory in the heart of Beirut. Hannah Rifkin reporting.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu revealed in his annual UN General Assembly speech on Tuesday a second precision-guided missile project site in the Beirut neighborhood of Janah, the site being located very close to the Beirut port and just east of the city's international airport. Netanyahu, therefore warning of a potential repeat blast, like that of the Beirut port explosion August 4th, which killed 200, injured thousands, and displaced nearly 500,000. Especially as the new alleged site sits side by side with two gas company buildings, a gas station, a church, a medical center, and tons of civilian housing.
I say to the people of Janah, you've got to act now. You've got to protest this. Because if this thing explodes, it's another tragedy. I say to the people of Lebanon, Israel means you no harm, but Iran does. Iran and Hezbollah have deliberately put you and your families in grave danger. And what you should make clear is what they have done is unacceptable. You should tell them, tear these depots down. Just a few days ago, one of these depots exploded at Ein Kana in South Lebanon. And that is why the international community must insist that Hezbollah stop using Lebanon and Lebanese civilians as human shields.
Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, on the other hand, denies the claims, saying that he would have no hesitation in informing the public if that was indeed the case.
إنه لا نحن ما بنحط صواريخ لا بمرفأ بيروت ولا حد محطة غاز وبنعرف جيدا أين يجب أن نضع صواريخنا.
Then, just to prove it, Hezbollah opened the doors of the supposed site to a crowd of journalists. The IDF, however, also insisting on the existence of these sites, tweeting out their coordinates and revealing 2 additional sites built under civilian apartment complexes, while urging journalists to check them out before they were cleared away. UAE journalist Ali Alamin, who is based in southern Lebanon, likewise telling Arabic media that, quote, everyone knows where the weapons are. Weapons in villages and cities is now an issue of life and death, end quote. And that, quote, it is neither justifiable nor acceptable, end quote, for Hezbollah to have weapons stored there. The precision-guided missile project's known goal is to transform a large amount of rockets into precision missiles, which would make it more difficult for Israel to defend against Hezbollah strikes. So, will the world stand with Netanyahu and his pleas to stop Iran's proxy progression in the region? Either way, one thing is for sure. The Israeli premier will not stop until they do.
In other news, a 2,000-year-old mikveh, or Jewish ritual bath, has now made its way to its new permanent location at the nearby kibbutz Hanaton of the Lower Galilee. Discovered in the first week of June this year during preparations for a highway's construction, the mikveh at Netivei Israel sat at the heart of a Roman-era farmstead, a farm that was destined to be destroyed by an earthquake 1,700 years ago and abandoned 300 years after that. But at any rate, local efforts in cooperation with antiquities officials have now brought the mikveh to kibbutz Hanaton, where the 57-ton artifact will be repaired and put back to use. And finally, while mikvehs are not entirely uncommon to find in the region, this particular bath reveals new insights into Jewish life during the Second Temple period. Specifically, it's the first hard evidence that there even was an established Jewish settlement in the area at that time. Archaeologists explaining that until now, it was considered that the Jews in the Roman period did not live in any farms outside of the major villages or towns. And now, with all the juicy details surrounding this incredible archaeological discovery, it's time for Can You Dig It with tour guide Anat Harel. Anat, I love that intro. Thanks so much for being with us. Now, we first spoke to you about this mikveh in Netivei Israel in June when you broke the story with us. And now I really feel like the story is coming full circle. What happened over the past 3 months to get this mikveh moved to kibbutz Hanaton?
Wow. So the day after we had our interview on ILTV, we started to raise money. We went crowdfunding. We raised money all over the place, especially in the United States and abroad. And we started talking to all kinds of organizations with the Jezreel Valley Regional District, and the Israel Antiquities Authority helped us out a lot. And then we even managed to get to the Prime Minister's office, to a thing called the Heritage in Jerusalem Fund, that decided they're going to help us because everyone realized this was an amazing thing to save. We had to save this mikveh from being covered up by concrete.
Absolutely. Well, and then I understand now that it's being moved to kibbutz Hanaton nearby and that they're actually going to put it to use.
Well, you see behind me, it's right behind me. What happened yesterday, after 3 weeks of sawing it out of the ground, it was in limestone. The bedrock was limestone. They sawed it out. They lifted it up. They brought it all the way to the kibbutz, and they placed it right here behind me next to the mikveh that we have. We have an active mikveh on our kibbutz. We are a religious kibbutz, multi-denominational. We have a mikveh that is open to everyone. And so that is why it was so important for us to bring it over here and lay it about 25 yards away from our mikveh. And now we're going to build a little archaeological garden so that we have a current mikveh and an ancient 2,000-year-old mikveh side by side. And yes, the idea is that hopefully one day we can actually refurbish it so that you can have a choice. You can either immerse yourself in the actual active mikveh or in a 2,000-year-old mikveh, the one that's sitting right behind me.
Wow. So I am not that religious myself, but I can't wait to come and see it and maybe even take a dip, and experience it for myself.
Yeah, you are all welcome. Give us a few weeks. We're going to get this all fixed up. And after the corona, you are welcome to come.
I'm so excited. Anat Harel, thank you so much for telling us all about it. And Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach to you. Thank you.
All right, in other news, practically the whole world is suffering financially right now with the coronavirus still in full swing. But that doesn't mean that there aren't any opportunities if you know where to look. So here with the latest is Emmanuel Kadosh.
Hey, Aaron. So I wanted to talk about an Israeli company that I think everyone should know more about. But before, let's be honest. Who of us hasn't wanted to become a shareholder in a successful, specifically Israeli startup? Obviously. The issue for many people is that they don't know where to start, So Smart Funding is making it super easy, offering a quick way to invest in some of Israel's leading companies and ventures.
All right, so how exactly does that work?
Basically, Smart Funding helps with business development and fundraising for Israeli startups. They make investment opportunities accessible to the general public, but Smart Funding doesn't just take any company. They focus on value-added ventures for people and the environment.
All right, so how do I know that these companies are legit, though?
Right, so Smart Funding is very particular with the companies that they take on, vetting the companies to make sure that there is minimal risk in investment. They evaluate companies' patents, HR, business development, strategy market surveys, and all that good stuff. They do this before adding companies to their roster or sharing them with the public.
Wow, all right, so where do we start if we want to invest?
All right, so how it works is actually very simple. Basically, there are a few steps. Step one is to visit the smartfunding.co.il website and learn more about the startups. Then submit the contract form to the company of your choosing. From there, you wait for one of their representatives to contact you with, additional details and documents. And finally, the last step is to choose the amount of investment you're willing to make. Now, Smart Funding is also under Israel's authority's security certification, which means that the entire process is done under regulation and can, of course, be fully trusted by you as the investor.
All right, all the T's crossed and I's dotted. All right, so what are some of the startups on the roster?
Of course. Again, there are a ton of companies to choose from, but the two that really stood out to me was the first is Ella Pharma, which provides a solution for necrosis and is developing an innovative treatment that could potentially revolutionize treatments for heart disease, strokes, and ALS. Ella Pharma already has patents, prototypes, and has done successful clinical trials. So this is actually a really good opportunity to both support Israel and Israeli startups, improve human quality, and earn good money in the near future. And then the second is TopNet, which is a holding company that holds Tavor Hedge Fund and provides a one-time opportunity to be an owner of a holding company. So TopNet has a few hedge funds and is actually growing and planning to open additional hedge funds and investment companies. So overall, it's a very profitable investment. But again, all of the details are on the Smart Funding site.
All right, it sounds very interesting, Emmanuel. I think I'm going to have to follow your follow your footsteps in what to invest. How do I earn money on this?
So according to Smart Funding, the best way is to wait for the exit once the startup is migrated to a big company or IPO or initial public offering. However, you can also sell your shares whenever you want as the company value is growing. And also, some companies at a certain point can distribute dividends to their shareholders, which is, of course, a great way to earn money as well.
Wow. All right. So it sounds like everyone should go and check out this site.
Right.
Again, you mentioned that it was smartfunding.co.il.
Right, smartfunding.co.il, and you have to just choose your preferred startup and submit the form, but make sure to act fast because the numbers of investors are, of course, limited.
All right, Manuel, thank you so much.
Of course.
And now let's take a look at the weather forecast. It appears that the weather still hasn't accepted that October is upon us, with lows tonight staying the same at around 72 Fahrenheit or 22 degrees Celsius. And tomorrow is expected to be warm with clear skies at an average high of 90 Fahrenheit or 32 degrees Celsius. And now, of course, before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. If it's not a dog, it's a cat. I love tubing. It's a good way to drink. It's efficient. That is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.45 shekels to the American dollar and 2.57 to the Canadian dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and Roku TV pages. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching.